So I've done enough Allen-related episodes at this point to have, told most of my own stories. But both you guys are new to the show, so now I want to talk about your own personal experiences with Allen's music, above and beyond, the current release. So let's start with Greg. Do you remember the first time you heard Allen's name and/or his music?
I sure do. I think it might have been the summer of '87, or it might have been '86. I can't remember exactly which one it was yet, but my dear friend from high school, Jamie Holka, who's a phenomenal guitarist actually in his own right, and now actually is in the last couple of years has become the current guitarist for the Prague outfit, Captain Beyond. So he's their current guitar player, which is really awesome. But his cousin, Fred Amendola, actually did the transcriptions for the book Reaching for the Uncommon Chord. And I didn't know anything about Allan at the time, and Jamie hadn't told me this yet, but we're hanging out in his basement. I've got my bass, he's got his guitar. I'm playing some of his music and blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, all right, we're all done playing. And he's like, here, I want to play, we're playing each other's favorite music. And he's like, now I have something really special to play for you. He pulls out a tape, pops it in. And he's like, oh, by the way, there aren't any keyboards on this song. And he presses play. And the first, I think it's 3 or 4 chords of Three Sheets to the Wind plays. And I am immediately in another universe. And I have never wanted to leave since.
Road Games was the first one for me too, and I was like, going, this guy's got his own trip.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Chris, same question. I mean, how did you first discover Allen? We know it was before 1998, but so far that's all we know.
Yeah, I believe it was late 80s. I learned about Allan out of the pages of a British guitar magazine called The Guitarist. And there was this interview with Allan about synthesis in music. And Allan was pictured with his, mighty beast called syntax in front of him. And I was like, what the hell? I think I was ready for this kind of music because I was constantly searching. I just got bored with the guitar concept as a guitar concept itself. I was starting to get something more out of music than just this particular instrument. So I believe around that time I also heard Stanley Jordan for the first time. It was like, wow, what was that?
Yeah.
And then Allan, I said, oh, it's a little bit too more. I'm afraid I can't stand it. I think the first album I heard was a Tabacron, so that hearing IOU series was a little bit difficult to me, if you know what I mean, because I've already started the exploring the other side of Allan. And I remember one particular night when I met a friend of mine, and we used to meet for just listening to some music. And I remember he brought Exit Stage Left by Rush, and was like, try this. Okay, I was patient, with a smile on my face. That's pretty much instant. Then I took out Ward and Clive Tower. It was 1992. I said, check out this. And who was a drummer? He went like, what was that? And Ward and Clive Tower, I would say it is a perfect album for me in case of arrangement, writing, processing, and producing. I know Gordy Davies had some minor issues with the low register, complaining that it was not done the way he was satisfied with it. Even probably Allan had some doubts about it. But the very first pressing of the Ward and Clive Tower album, I still have in my archives, is blowing my mind to this day, and therefore Ward and Clive Tower is the very beginning of my Allan Holdsworth saga.
Nice. It's so funny you mentioned Rush. When I asked Greg, when did you first hear Allan's name and or music? Sometimes you read the article in Guitar Player. With Eric Johnson, I read the article before I heard his music. I heard about Allan Holdsworth from Alex Lifeson of Rush. So somebody asked him, what guitar players you like? He goes, Allan Holdsworth. So I said, well, if Alex Lifeson likes him, I should check it out. Now, we know that Chris saw Allan live because we've been speaking about that. Before I asked Greg if he got a chance to see Allan live, I had forgotten all about this, but I just remembered. Allan was playing at UC Davis, and I wanted to go see it, but I had my own gig that night in Sacramento, and I was trying to calculate if I got off the stage at this time and I drove to Davis, which is 35 minutes west, could I get there in time for the show? I debated, calling in sick and, stiffing my own band and just saying, oh, I can't, I have the flu, I can't do it. And I didn't get to do it. And I was really irritated that I didn't get to go see it. But that was the only chance I really sort of had. And so I'm wondering, Greg, if you got to see Allan play live.
Oh, yeah, I really did. Unfortunately, not with the Syntax, but in 1991, I stood in line, I think starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon for a general seating event. For a concert that wasn't going to happen for 5 hours. I'm out there in the daylight, with a buddy of mine, Rob Lynch. And I was 19, and it was a phenomenal experience. Chad was on drums, and Schoolies Farrison was on bass, and Steve Hunt was on keyboards. It was quite an experience. And having a table right at the front, it was mind blowing for somebody who was as into him as I was, right. as I am now to this day. And it was pretty amazing because he was definitely my what I consider to be one of the ultimate, not just musicians, but one of the ultimate artists of all of history. Mm-hmm. He's just impeccable. Every single note, every single decision it's impeccable. And we all benefit from his, we joke about him being perfectionistic, but it's funny, in the last couple of years, I've come to realize, we've really benefited from that perfectionism. Yeah, we wouldn't mind that first solo, but, there's also a benefit to his perfectionism. As much as it probably held him back sometimes, it also, I think, really is one of the reasons why we're all drawn to him. Mm-hmm. And after the show, I was able to talk to him a little bit, and I was kind of intense as a younger person, and probably still am now. And I told him, I said, I got to tell you, nothing has moved me more in this life than your music. And he just really heard me, and he said, that really, you don't know how much that means for me to hear you say that. And it made a really big impression on me, and I've been a huge fan, my whole life, and that was a fantastic concert. And I saw him in Buffalo a year later and gave him a photo from that day, which Luis had told me this is normal for him, but he had saved this letter that I wrote on the back of a photo that I gave him, saying that I would even really welcome the opportunity to even be a roadie for you, just to be able to be around and learn and whatnot. And really strange full circle situation that I ended up, along with Manning Bartlett, being a roadie for Allan for some of the last shows, and then posthumously, a friend of his, Eddie Koralnik, gave me the photo. He found it among some of Allan's belongings, and that photo with the letter was on the back of it. And it's kind of, for me, a very important connection to him. You know what I mean? His music means a lot to me.
I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to that. It's nice that it's amazing that you got the chance to sort of have that personal connection with them. And as Dan Perloff and I discussed, you hear a lot of stories like that about Allan, and you never hear a single story about him being rude to anybody or being short with someone or ever in his whole career.
Nope, never. Steve Vai, he made the decision after Allan was so nice to him when he was a kid, and gave him free tickets to the Orpheum, and he said, if I'm ever lucky enough to be famous like him one day and a great musician, I'll always have time for people. And Steve does. So that's a great example of how to be, how to live your life, and how people can model that. And actually it's something else. It's really something else that who I consider to be one of the most important, artists of all time, is that giving and that generous with his time and truly caring about other people, and quite an individual.
I totally agree with you, Greg, in terms of ranking him with any musician who's ever lived. He's a Chopin to me. He's a Franz Liszt to me. He's of that level. To the extent that if you go to any music store and open up sheet music by any of those guys, and then open up a transcript of Allan, you'll go, yeah, this guy is on the level of Bach.
Absolutely. You literally took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say, well, also there's Bach. He's almost like Bach, Roman numeral 2, because he's kind of taking voice leading into a completely new direction where it's not based on classic triadic understandings of, chord structures and that type of thing. He's just in a world where it's, purely sound or math or whatever you want to call it. Musicologists can talk a lot better about Allan than I can, but he threw everything away and started over again. Who does that? It's incredible.
And of course, he was able to be influenced. He was able to be influenced by John Coltrane and Charlie Parker. I was wondering if someone like Mozart or Bach was living at a time where they could be influenced by jazz chord voicings and the jazz approach. How that would have affected them. I also wonder. I think Jimi Hendrix was going in that direction. Chris mentioned sort of being burned out on normal guitar. I doubt Jimmy got to hear Allan, but I'll bet you if Jimmy heard Allan, he'd be like, okay, this is where I'm heading. I don't know if I can, but this is where I'm heading.
Totally.
Jimmy played at the Isle of Wight, and that was the second gig Emerson, Lake and Palmer ever did. And there was a rumor that Hendrix was going to join them and call the band Help. Hendrix, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Help.
That's awesome.
I don't know if it's true or not, but imagine Jimi Hendrix and Keith Emerson in the same band.
Oh my goodness, that'd be incredible.
Well, thanks very much, Greg. Back to Chris. I mean, have you got any personal connections above and beyond what you've already told us about? Any stories about Allan?
There sure is a particular one. Watching the family video from the public memorial convinced me that I finally need to share this particular story about Al with myself in the background. And I have shared it before with only two people remaining close to the Holdsworth family because, it was all about the family, about intimate and fragile things you want just to say for yourself and stuff. So it's a kind of like a testimonial. So it was back in 2003, but we booked Al and Joel Taylor and Ernest Tips for the Warsaw JVC Jazz Jamboree Fest, the younger brother of the Warsaw Summit Jazz Days. So there was the same location, same exclusive venue for 2,700 seats, and Al seemed to enjoy back in the 98. There were no television broadcasts, just a live local FM broadcast, and I must admit I found Allan in much worse physical shape than 5 years earlier. And he was going through the divorce turmoil and, dropping more than occasional F-bombs and not feeling comfortable in general. You can feel it. So after the performance, Al wanted to stay up. And as I remember, Joe failed tired and went straight to his hotel room. And Ernest, he was probably taking an online driving exam or something. So Al asked me whether I would accompany him, which he was kind enough to ask me a number of times before. And believe me, to this day, I do not know why he did that. So I remember we sat in a Westin hotel bar in Warsaw over glasses of red wine. And Allan started telling me his divorce story a little bit, and getting deeper and deeper into his family relations and emotions. And I felt really scared when I heard Al say, the fact that we cannot live together does not mean we do not love each other. That's what he said. And I replied, well, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure if I'm the right person for you to listen to and discuss what you're telling me. Then Al asked if I had any children, and I said I had a 2-year-old. And Al responded, then you are the right person because you would understand. And you might make use of what I'm telling you for the future of your own family. Would you believe that? I just teared up, and so did Al. And he said, you're going to visit me in California with your wife and son, and we'll be racing together, and you will kick my ass. Because Al knew I was an amateur road bike racer, right? We discussed a ton of racing before. And I replied, granted, provided you'll kick my ass first, and so on and so on. And then, out of thin air, a Polish piano virtuoso and a friend named Leszek Możdżer, he's a world-famous pianist, he appeared, seeing us both, in snot and tears, and he just asked whether we were all right. And I remember Allan said, well, we cannot recall the name of Frank Sinatra's arranger that's bring your manhood level down or something like this. And so Leszek smiled and unveiled a T-shirt under his jacket with Jesus Christ from Rio statue printed. And he said to Al, pointing at his T, have no worries, he loves you. And Al replied, I really hope so. And you know what? To this day, I have a black and white photo of Allan and Leszek I took that night.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, you guys both had some great stories, and I said earlier that I kind of exhausted my supply, but there is one story that I did tell when Steve Hunt was on the show. I recorded myself telling him this story because it involved him. But I decided to cut it out of his episode because we did a sort of career retrospective and we had plenty of stuff. And it was kind of a long story and I didn't really want to detract the attention from him. But I think this might be a good time to tell it. You guys might appreciate this. At the Phoenix Club in Anaheim, Greg was there. You did all that video content. I happen to know, speaking about behind the scenes stuff, that you didn't sleep the night before. You were up all night working. Manning told me that. But I flew out from Arizona for that. I flew out on Friday, so I went to the social event and I met Emily and I met up with Manning and Lynn, Allan's older daughter, and Eddie Kralnick you mentioned. He was there too, and that was all good. Saturday, I wasn't able to go to the concert because I was recording at, believe it or not, Robbie Rist's house, cousin Oliver from the Brady Bunch. I was at his house. I was at his house recording podcasts with Olivia Dabo, a different show. But I stayed at a hotel in Anaheim that was super close to the venue because I offered to Manning and the family. I said, look, I'm devoting the whole day to you guys, and if I can help out, let me know. So basically what had happened was when Allan passed away, Manning and Greg had started a fundraiser to help cover the funeral expenses. And one of the things that the family had promised was there would be a public event. And that's what this was. This was the 1-year anniversary of Allan's passing. So basically the date of that, Manning was the first person there. No surprise. He was the first person. I was the second person there. And it's funny because as I walked in, Manning he had his tank top and shorts on, and he just looked at me in the eye. He goes, "Bad timing." And I didn't know what he meant. Then I looked down and there was a big heavy keyboard on the floor that he had rented for Steve Hunt, and he wanted me to pick up the other end and carry it. And so really technically it was good timing because now he didn't have to drag it. So I picked it up and we were setting it up, and Steve Hunt was the third person, and he was going to use this rented keyboard because he was going to do a performance with Chad Wackerman's daughter. And they were sort of sorting that out. I remember Manning called you, Greg, to see if you had a sustain pedal because he forgot to get one.
Oh, that's right.
All that kind of stuff. It turns out, just by a sheer bizarre circumstance, there was a grand piano on the stage off to the side that somebody had brought for a completely different event. So we finagled our way to use that. So Steve played that, and we didn't even use the rented keyboard at all. But
so great.
And then after Steve, Marie Takahashi showed up, and Virgil Donati. He wasn't at the event because he was doing something in Europe. I think he was doing a clinic or so their version of the NAMM show or something.
That's right.
And so then the family showed up. It was like Emily and her fiance Owen, who they've since got married, Louise and her daughter Rory, Allan's oldest daughter Lynn, and Aunt Louise, who's Allan's first wife's sister. They both traveled all the way from the UK. I had met both of them on Friday night. And basically, this was a few hours before the general public was supposed to show up. And so, I was carrying stuff, and they ordered all those beautiful white roses. Where are we going to put the flowers? How are we going to display all of Allan's guitars? For everybody who showed up later, it looked very organized and thought out. Trust me, it wasn't. It looked great at the end, but it was all about winging it and figuring it out. But the reason I'm telling this story is the famous brewery sign, right? The big, heavy wooden sign for Allan's studio in San Diego, the brewery, right? And I asked Emily, well, where do you want to put this? And she looked around and she pointed at the podium, where everybody was going to speak. And, over there. And I thought, oh, okay. And I put it over. It was the right size. It was a nice way to sort of personalize the podium, having the brewery sign. It was great. But there was a problem. The podium was on wheels and it rolled. And the sign was pretty heavy. So I said, we can't just lean the sign against the podium, right? Because there's like 3 or 4 of Allan's guitars right there. And I had this nightmare compulsion that somebody was going to go up there, bump it, the sign was going to fall and crush one of his guitars. And I did not want that to happen. Emily and everybody else moved on to other things, but I was on a mission to not let that happen. So I found the guy who worked there. We tried tape. And the sign was too heavy. Tape wasn't going to work. And eventually what happened is the guy who worked there, the custodian guy, he came up with some fishing line. And together we tied the sign to the podium with fishing line.
Wow.
And sure enough, Steve Hunt, who had no idea, he told me, "Oh man, I'm so glad you did that," because he was the first guy to speak. You remember that, Greg?
Yeah.
And after him, it was Chad Wackerman, and then a whole bunch of people after that. He goes, "Yeah, man, I was touching that podium. I was bumping it. He did not want to be the guy who did that." And so if you watch those videos, obviously the highlight is the speakers and Greg's beautiful stuff. But I went and looked. If you zoom in sort of on the image, you can see about a third of the way down the sign, there's fish. I just bumped my own microphone. There's some fishing line tying off that sign, and that was my contribution to the event. That is an invisible contribution I'm kind of proud of, because even afterwards,
That's awesome.
even when Manning and Alex Sill and people like that were passing Allan's guitars around, I did not want to touch one of Allan's guitar. I did not want to be remembered as the asshole who dropped Allan's guitar and cracked the neck. So.
I know what you're talking about, Dan. Believe me, I was just a couple of inches away from his delapse, and I was like, no, don't even try to think about it, So I know what you're talking about.
Anyways, as you can tell, that was a long story. So Steve appreciated it, but it wouldn't have fit in his episode. So even though it wasn't like personal with Allan, I have to say that event, and Greg knows because Greg was there, the daughters didn't know if 3 people were going to show up or 3,000, There was no RSVP. There were some amazing people there. There were some tributes from Bill Bruford and Jennifer Batten and Jamie Glazer and all the people you'd expect. It was a beautiful thing. I'm really glad I went out and did it. It was very tastefully done. I mean, the catering and the decoration and the venue itself, it was really cool. I did not get to meet Allan in person like you guys did, but I did get to interview him. It wasn't technically the last interview of his life, but it was the last sort of full-length one. And after I did that interview, I listened to it 5, 6, 7 times in a row because I couldn't believe it ever happened. He was as you guys mentioned, I heard Road Games in the 80s, recognized him as let's just say it, a genius of music, followed him ever since. And I had tried, he was always on my wish list, but, he was insulated by his prior management. He wasn't really easy to get to. He wasn't a guy who was really eager to do interviews, frankly. But then when I saw that Ann Layton was representing him, and I knew Ann, I just, sort of can't hurt to ask, "Hey, Ann, can I maybe get some time with Allan?" And she said, "Sure," because the box set was coming out, and she knew me, and she knew I'd take good care of him. And then, man, it was like, I don't know if I've ever told this story, but the first time I was booked to interview Allan was like a weeknight. Like it was like Wednesday or Thursday at 6 o'clock or something. And he was a no-show because he was stuck in traffic. He was like about an hour late, and then Ann was in East Coast time. It was hard to catch her. She was working that night. She said, "I'll try and get a hold of him," and basically she said he's stuck in traffic. So it never happened. And I thought, you know what? It's not meant to be. I'm not going to talk to Allan Holdsworth, And then sure enough, the next Sunday, like 3 or 4 days later, we tried again. Called him up. He answered, and possibly the nicest, all present company accepted. You guys are great, but possibly the nicest person I've ever had on the show. Super patient, super polite. And what I had done with Allan was I had a lot of tributes come in, sort of similar to what the 3 of us have been speaking about. When did you first hear Allan? Well, for Mark Bonilla, it was Enigmatic Ocean. For Joe Martin, it was Metal Fatigue, the actual song. He said just made his whole brain light up, hearing it through a Walkman. And everybody had their story to tell. Carl Jha met him when he was doing Level 42, just bumped into him, outside the studio. And we all have those stories. And I thought Allan might get a kick about hearing these people who he would probably respect because they're all good players and stuff. And he did. And when Allan passed away, I was shocked because Lyle Workman had posted, "So sorry to hear about the passing of Allan Holdsworth." I was just on the phone with that guy. I could not believe it. And also the other thing that was sort of sad for me personally was he had said at the end of the interview he wanted to come back on the show, talk about his next thing, and we were like buddies now. So it was like personal disappointment. For me, I wish I would have gone out and seen some of those shows he had done in anticipation of the box set that you and Manning were at and everything. Although, as you know, Greg, I did go to the Baked Potato, and I saw Chad and Virgil and Jimmy Johnson and all that. It was still great stuff. And, his presence, it's sort of like when John Lennon died, or even like Michael Jackson or somebody. Their presence made such an impact on the culture, they're not going anywhere. In Allan's case, it was a little more under the radar, because he's a musician's musician. The average layperson just hears a flurry of notes and doesn't really understand it. Well, Charlie Parker went through that. Ludwig van Beethoven went through that. I mean, come on. Very few musical geniuses are appreciated in their day. Anyways, I didn't expect to go on such a long tirade there, but just to bring it all back to the current release, Dan Perloff, he was sort of assigned Allan, and I'm sure Dan has come to realize that Allan is not just your run-of-the-mill artist. He was unique himself, his music is unique, and his fan base is unique in their devotion to Allan and also in their knowledge of music. To really appreciate Allan, you have to understand a little bit more about music than the average person. And as we've already said, Manifesto gets all that. We've got this awesome Warsaw release. We have the Japan release. It's almost kind of embarrassing to say, but we're getting more Allan releases now that we've lost him than we did when he was around, because he agonized over every note.
Yeah, it's tough. I think sometimes where's the line, right? Like where you go from being really careful about curating your own work and making it perfect, and where's the line between that and getting in your own way? I don't know the answer to that. Allan's was very, very high. His bar was very, very, very high. So it's unfortunate. So obviously terribly unfortunate that he's gone now. But the subtle relaxing of some of the criteria by the family and people that work with him allows us all to benefit from seeing more and hearing more than we would have. So it's a double-edged sword, but I think people appreciate and benefit from more.
That's very well said. And I'm sure if Allan was to watch the DVD, he would not pay any attention to the 99.9% of the concert that went right. He would notice the one mistake he made here and the one little thing he wished he would have done different there. Aren't we all like that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I remember what Allan said when they left the stage. He said, we're not going to be back. We're sucked. And the people went really frenzy in the audience. And I remember it took about 3 or 5 minutes for me to get him convinced that they really should be back for a short encore. So that is the way the Protocosmos was played as an encore for the end of the Warsaw show.
I'm glad you encouraged him.
Yeah, sort of. He went like, for what? For what? We sucked.
Yeah, well, as we've said many times, he's so self-critical. He was famous for jokingly apologizing. I'm sorry you had to hear that about his playing. Meanwhile, most of us don't even want to touch our guitar anymore after hearing him play. It's a combination of great inspiration and sort of great depression to see somebody who's that good at something. So again, the name of the new album is Allan Holdsworth, Warsaw Summer Jazz Days 98. It's 9 tracks of musical magic plus a 14-song bonus DVD. More great value for Manifesto. Definitely something you want to add to your collection. I want to thank Dan Perloff for sending me an advance copy. Thanks also to Manning Bartlett, Marie Takahashi, and the Unreal Allan Holdsworth Facebook group. As always, special thanks to Allan's children, Lynn, Luis, Sam, and Emily. We're going to close this out with one of the standout tracks from the album, which I want to dedicate to the memories of Dave Carpenter and, of course, the great one himself, Mr. Allan Holdsworth. The name of the track is Texas, and I believe, Greg, you also have a fondness for this particular track.
Well, working on this release on the DVD in particular and doing a little bit of audio mastering on it, every time I got to Texas, I could not believe the soaring energy, the excitement, the tone of this song. And I think, again, we benefit from the fact that in this particular mix, his guitar is a little louder than he typically would like or allow. And it's glorious. Let me just say that for Holdsworth fans, it's glorious.
Yeah, well said. It definitely jumped out at me. Well, Greg, thanks for being on the show today, for your input with this project and, for your friendship in general. It's been a pleasure having you on. Any final thoughts about Allan and this release?
It's fantastic, I think, to finally have a concert from this era, a very special era for Allan, where, he's coming out of one era and getting into another era that has a little more of a traditional flavor, more of a trio, closer to traditional jazz. Like all kinds of things are happening that give you a multi-dimensional experience for Allan, and it's quite something. And I'm really excited for fans to be able to hear this.
And Chris, thanks not only for joining us today on the show, but on behalf of the Holdsworth fan community, thanks for the huge contribution you made back in the day to making this happen in the first place. You've got our undying gratitude and respect for that.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thanks for having me.
If you're listening to this prior to June 14th, 2019, please pre-order your copy of Warsaw Summer Jazz Days 98. Manifesto recommends Amazon as the go-to spot, but wherever you can find it. And if you're listening after that date, well, you really have no excuse, do you? Just go buy it now. Thanks again to Greg and Chris and Dan Perloff. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
We're going to continue with a tune. This one's called Texas. Well, there, sonnies, get your guns and boots ready. Gary Novak, drums. Dave Carpenter, bass. Thank you so very, very much for coming. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Did you guys happen to see the little Easter egg that I dropped into the DVD? Like when you go to, you're on the menu and you go to play it. I don't know if Chris, you probably haven't gotten a copy yet.
Where
right?
did you hide it?
I did have, but where did you hide it, Greg?
Oh yeah, it's not actually an Easter egg per se because it's not hidden. When you go to play it, you'll hear that little joke that Allan says,
Right.
"Get your guns and boots ready." Well, then
Right.
I took little snapshots from the screen from. I went through the Wayback Machine. Yeah, and I made that animation. I actually took his hand from the snap. I did 3 snapshots of the animation of the old website by going through the Internet Wayback Machine, and the background, the fretboard, and I recreated that animation in editing and made that animation all over again and made it like horizontal, and that's just like a little fun throwback to the old website. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When we hang up, I'll go check that out.